When you think of England's ancestors, you would be forgiven for thinking about the Anglo-Saxons. After all, England literally means the land of the Angles. Yet there was a people long before this Germanic wave arrived, the Ancient Celtic Britons. But who actually were these people? What did their DNA look like? And how does their genetics still shape the DNA map of England and Britain today? Now, the Britons lived in what is now England, Wales and southern Scotland before and during the Roman occupation of Britain. Now, for reference, the Romans arrived in earnest around 43 AD, after some initial expeditions a little earlier. These Britons were not a single unified people, however. They were a collection of tribes that often shared similar languages, religious beliefs and social structures. And if you look at this map, you can see some of these groups. The Brigantes were powerful in ancient northern England, the Iceni in East Anglia, and the Silures in South Wales. The language they spoke, Common Brittonic, or dialects of this language at least, is the ancestor of the modern Welsh, Cornish and Breton tongues. Now, I should note that the Caledonians to the north and the Picts, the later Picts, were related peoples to the Britons, and they probably spoke a related language in some way. They were distinct though in various ways, separated by geography, Roman influence, and divergent development north of the Fourth Clyde line. And we will see later that there was slightly different genetic migrations into southern Britain versus the north as well, just before the Iron Age. Now, by the time the Romans properly arrived around 43 AD, the ancient Britons had established fortified hill settlements, practiced skilled metalwork, and engaged in trade with continental Europe. They also had their own coinage. And when the Anglo-Saxon migrations began around the fall of Roman Britain in the 5th century, many Britons were pushed west into Wales and Cornwall. Others went north into Strathclyde and other parts of southern Scotland, preserving their language and culture there. A region known as the Old North or Hen or Glaive, as this map shows. But what was the relationship like between the Britons and the Celtic Gauls around modern-day France, often considered the home of Celtic civilization in the ancient world? Well, both peoples spoke related Celtic languages and shared similar art styles, religious beliefs and tribal social structures, and they also traded with each other. They were even close enough for the Britons to send reinforcements to Gaul during the Roman invasion. As Julius Caesar wrote in The Conquests of Gaul, in a section on the first invasion of Britain around 55 BC, Caesar, and this book is written in the third person, which is quite strange when you're reading it, Caesar made active preparations for an expedition to Britain, because he knew that in almost all the Gallic campaigns, the Gauls had received reinforcements from the Britons. And Caesar also wrote that the structure of societies in both Gaul and Britain had similarities. In a section on the customs and institutions of the Gauls, he writes that the Druidic doctrine is believed to have been found existing in Britain, and thence imported into Gaul, which is pretty interesting. He added that even today, those who want to make a profound study of it generally go to Britain for the purpose. So there seem to be many links between the southern Britons and Gaul. But what do we know about the genetics of the Britons, and do they still help shape the DNA map of Britain today? Now, quickly before we look at this, if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing. And if you would like access to member-only videos, please check out the top link in the video description below. Thank you, and now on with the video. Now, the genetic foundation that the ancient Britons emerged from was shaped by several major ancient peoples and migrations. Britain's earliest inhabitants were Western hunter-gatherers, of course, and then early European farmers arrived around 6,000 years ago or so, bringing Near Eastern ancestry into Britain. Later, between around 2500 and 2000 BC, a massive Bronze Age migration occurred, with Bellbeaker groups sweeping into Britain. And we do know that during this time, there was a massive replacement of the local male line lineages, with R1b, especially R1b P312 and the later subclad R1b L21 becoming much more common. These newcomers also brought variants for lighter hair colours, including red hair that I note in a previous video. And they also introduced lighter eye genes once again, as although Western hunter-gatherers largely had blue eyes and brown hair, We know that early European farmers had dark hair and also dark eyes as well, mainly brown for the most part. Now, around the end of the Bronze Age, and just before the Iron Age began in Britain, which began around 800 BC or so, there was another genetic influx from the continent. This is what a 2022 study published in Nature found. As between 1000 and 875 BC, there was an increase in early European farmer ancestry in southern Britain, in England and Wales today, but this didn't happen in northern Britain, i.e. in Scotland. This was due to a wave of migrants who were genetically closest to ancient individuals from France. Now, these new arrivals did intermix with the local population of Britain at the time, as opposed to replacing it. And this study also noted that this event could have created a plausible vector for the spread of Celtic languages into Britain, although this is debated in general, and this is a topic for another video. So this is the genetic foundation that the Britons grew out of. But what were the main haplogroups of the Britons, and what modern population is closest to these ancient ancestors? Well, a really interesting paper was published in Nature Communications in 2016, which analysed 10 Iron Age and Anglo-Saxon genomes from East England. Now look at this table. This is the DNA breakdown of these 10 people, with the first 3 from the Celtic Briton period. The first sample was a female who belonged to the mitochondrial haplogroup H1E, with branches of H still very common in Britain and Western Europe today, of course. The next 2 are males, with both belonging to the Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, both within the R1b L21 branch as well, albeit with alternative names. Now, if you look at this map, you can see this haplogroup is more common in parts of Britain and Ireland, who still speak a Celtic language today, such as Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and Cornwall in the southwest. It is also elevated in Brittany and France, which was settled by many Celtic Britons between around 400 and 600 AD, just at the end of the Roman period and the start of the Anglo-Saxon migrations. And if we focus on England in particular, we can see that this haplogroup is lowest in Eastern England, especially in East Anglia. And we know this is the case because of the Anglo-Saxons. This 2016 study found, for instance, that on average, the contemporary East English population derives 38% of its ancestry from Anglo-Saxon migrations, with these Anglo-Saxon samples closely related to modern Dutch and Danish populations. There was evidence of intermixing between migrants and natives in the early Anglo-Saxon period, however, showing a blending of these ancestries and peoples in many ways. Now, another study was published in 2016 in Nature Communications again that looked at the genetics of pre-Anglo-Saxon Britain. This study analysed 9 ancient genomes, 7 from a Roman-era York cemetery, 1 from the earlier Iron Age period, and 1 a later Anglo-Saxon burial. Now, they found that 6 of the 7 individuals sampled here are clearly indigenous Britons in their genomic signal. When considered together, they are similar to the earlier Iron Age sample, whilst the modern group with which they show closest affinity are Welsh. These genomes also show similarity with the earlier Iron Age genome, suggesting population continuity, but differ from the later Anglo-Saxon genome. So the Welsh today are genetically closest to the ancient Britons, partly due to Britons tending to move west in times of invasion down through history. Now, I should note that overall, the Romans never had a major impact on the DNA of Britain, outside of some rare cases, mainly in urban areas. So the genetics of the Britons had strong roots in the bell-beaker culture, and this gene flow from continental Europe just before the Iron Age. They were dominated by the Y-DNA haplogroup R1b L21 on the male side, and branches of HU and others on the maternal side. And although they both shared a common northwestern European origin, the Iron Age Britons were genetically different from the later Anglo-Saxon samples. These people were closely related to Danes and Dutch people, and were dominated by R1b U106 on the Y-DNA side. Yet there was mixing between these 2 groups as well. And when we look at southern Britain today, we can still see this genetic legacy. People in Wales, far west England, and other pockets of England in general still carry a strong genetic legacy of the ancient Britons, whereas people in eastern England have a larger Germanic imprint on the other hand. Yeah, there has been plenty of overlap as well. But what are the main DNA differences between Scotland and England? Well, to find out, please click here. Thanks for watching, please subscribe and hit the bell, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.